Hello, welcome back. This is part 4 of my NES collection videos. This will be the last of them. We're kind of in the home stretch, I guess. As I've done each time, just for a second, I want to give Chris at Classic Gaming Quarterly a big shout out again. Kind of the inspiration for, I guess, my hobby as a hockey blogger. And I'll probably do some of those eventually, especially if we're continuing to spend more time at home than I normally would. But anyways, it really wouldn't happen without kind of his support and encouragement, whether he feels that was overt or not. I will post a link for this video to join the Discord that he has. A great community, a lot of good people are there, and I don't know. It's a fun thing. A lot of great people hang around at his Discord, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Okay, so these are probably about 25, 30 games left. So I'll start with this one. This is Bobble by Taito. My friend Andrew had this game. I mentioned Andrew in the previous stream. He was the guy who had the power pad, and also RBI base when I told you about, I guess, my weird accomplishment of pitching from first base. But anyways, he had this one, and I'd never really heard of it before until I went to Andrew's house. I don't know, the game is kind of considered a classic of the NES era. This is the first one. They made a sequel, which is actually kind of a rare game. I don't know. It's kind of simple. I believe this was an arcade port. I could be wrong. In fact, actually, I'm pretty sure. I think it was an arcade. And it's fairly simple. You go through the different stages, and you're trying to spell out different. I think you're trying to spell out Nintendo, if I remember correctly. And it's okay. The music, though, with the lack of variety, it definitely gets really kind of grinding. And I don't know. It's a game that when I eventually picked it back up again, I guess I kind of remembered maybe why I decided to kind of put it down. And so for me, this probably would have been a more appropriate game as a weekend rental, but I do remember playing it as a kid, and I don't know, I just couldn't stop myself from picking up a copy when I had the chance. Next one is, I'm not being a pervert, Monster in My Pocket, which of course was a toy series that was around. This is by Konami, and Monster in My Pocket, in a way, it's kind of like maybe like a Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. Also, one thing, since you might be listening or you might watch the streams, I have to give a shout out to my friend Josh for I guess you'd say gifting me that Rescue Rangers game that really meant a lot. And it's a really good copy because Josh doesn't get anything that isn't a great copy. And I'm really grateful for that. I should have mentioned that yesterday, so I apologize for that. But anyways, Monster in My Pocket is, I don't know, there was a series of small little figurines that were, again, I guess it was supposed to fit in your pocket. And you can be, I think, one of two characters, but maybe there's more than that. And you're kind of going through a world as though you're like a toy in, the regular world. So, you're kind of navigating, different parts of a house as you go through and take on little enemies here and there. And I haven't played it too much. I just really kind of saw a playthrough of it. It's kind of a rare game because it's a later release for Konami. But I thought it was interesting. And I picked this one locally here at Games for Us here in Boston. And it was kind of one of those games that was in a box, a lot of pretty crusty things. And the label looks a little okay, but compared to a lot of the other things in the box, this was one of the few games that was in better shape. Okay, this next one is a really cool game. This is Bionic Commando by Capcom. And Bionic Commando is a unique Nintendo game, sort of like Boy and his Blob in that way that the character, you can't really jump with your character. Instead, you use your bionic arm to kind of swing around. And that's kind of a unique sort of mechanic that makes Bionic Commando very distinctive. I think this is an underrated game. It probably deserves more love than it gets. It's kind of a mid-release for the Nintendo. I knew people that I heard that people had it, but I didn't actually really ever get a chance to see someone playing it. And I guess I wish I would have seen it because I probably would have really enjoyed it, and I definitely probably would have found a way to acquire a copy myself a lot earlier than I did. I purchased this on the internet probably about a year ago, and it's not a bad copy. Okay, this is Sky Shark by Taito. This was a pretty mass-produced shooter, very, very similar to 1942 or 1943. It's also set in World War II. The only difference, instead of flying a P-38, you're supposedly flying a P-40 Warhawk. And the one thing I'll say about this game that I really like is I really like the soundtrack. I can't remember the name of the composer, but it's one of my favorite ones in terms of like a soundtrack for, especially for a shooter. And again, it's similar in the overall gameplay. I mean, you're trying to upgrade. You're playing as best you can. It gets a little glitchy, especially as the game gets busier, which of course is always an issue, especially with shooters usually, where you kind of get that flicker effect. But I always thought I thought the cover was fantastic. And being a kid who was interested in World War II, this was maybe one of the best covers, I thought personally. But it is a bit ridiculous to think that one plane could do all the things that one could do. But hey, it's video games, and this is a title I had briefly, and then I got rid of it when I sold all those games for my Super Nintendo. But it was definitely a game I had to get back again. Okay, next game on here is one that is really unique, and also a title you don't see very much. This is WURM by Asmik. Asmik didn't have too many titles, but this is a WURM, which is Journey to the Center of the Earth. And so it's a kind of a weird platformer / shooter. It's got a little bit of both in them. The boss battles are kind of repetitive because they're very similar in style, but it's a really unique game that I think was pretty ambitious for the Nintendo because of all the different things that it tried to do. But it's definitely very unique. The main protagonist is a woman, which that in itself there weren't too many games that had female protagonists in it. And basically you kind of move around the game platforming style with her. She's kind of limited. She just kind of has like a kick and a punch, and it's a bit stiff that way. The shooting levels which is where you're in the you can see the drill crawler kind of machine as you move through the different layers of the earth, and there's these people that are there that are kind of messing with you and have taken one of your other drill crawlers like captive, and so you're trying to get them back. And it's got an interesting storyline. There's cutscenes, although the cutscenes are kind of forcefully slow, it makes the game, I think, a lot longer than it needs to be. And there's not a lot of variety to them, so you kind of feel like if you've seen one cutscene, as much as they're trying to be Ninja Gaiden and have like twists and turns, none of the twists and turns are surprising at all. Spoiler alert. but it does try to attempt that cinematic thing too that that Ninja Gaiden did. So, but it's a really unique game. Again, it's kind of a rare one. I found this one online. I think I paid like $40 for it. Okay, this next one I purchased locally. This is Tom and Jerry by High Tech, and pretty simple platformer. Kind of self-explanatory if you've ever seen the cartoon. Did not sell very well. High Tech really didn't have a lot of volume with this one, so it is a little bit more rare. I will admit I bought this because someone was talking about the rarity of the game, and I thought that was probably more interesting than really being intrigued by, you know, any kind of nostalgia for Tom and Jerry, the cartoon itself. So I've only played it once, and it's okay. It's an okay game, but again, it's kind of limited. I don't know, maybe for kids my age, while we may have seen these cartoon, it wasn't really something that, you know, made us want to rush out and buy it. And again, it was probably maybe geared more maybe towards a younger audience than most kids that were playing Nintendo. Okay, here's another one. This is actually a pretty rare game. This is by Infocom, and this is Tombs and Treasure. I picked this game up for my History Through Video Games class. Even though it's not technically historically based, but it is about a group of treasure hunters that are moving throughout the Mayan ruins of Chichen Itza in Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula. And I don't know, because of its connections to like the Mayans, and it's kind of an action and it's kind of an adventure RPG, although it's kind of slow. I thought that would be an appropriate game to kind of learn maybe more about like Mayan history. That was what my goal was with it. And so I purchased this probably about 12 or 13 years ago, and it's a pretty rare game. It's only worth about $35, but it's definitely not one you see very often, and this is a pretty good copy of it. I remember reading about this game too in the Nintendo Power. It was not one of the feature games, so it didn't have like a big walkthrough or anything. It was kind of part of their, like, especially towards the end or kind of the middle end of the magazine, they usually had kind of like a bunch of very small, maybe like paragraph or two. I guess I don't want to call them reviews, but they kind of just explained the basic premise of the game and showed you maybe one or two screenshots. And for whatever reason, Tombs and Treasure was a game that I just distinctly remember. I think because of they showed like an overview map where you can see Chichen Itza, and I thought, oh, that's neat, you know. And I don't know, I'm definitely a nerd, and so I thought that was cool, and it was a game I just didn't forget about. So when you know, years later, when I thought of this History Through Video Games class, that was I had to first of all remember the name, which isn't the most memorable name in the world because it's pretty vague. But I eventually, you know, I finally see it, and I'm like, yeah, that's the game. I remember this, you know, and then it kind of triggered my memory, and so I picked it up. So, Tombs and Treasure. Okay, next is another blatant commercial, and this is also a rare, not really rare, but it's an Arcadia title. Arcadia made Silver Surfer, although this time, unlike Silver Surfer, where they just had block text saying Silver Surfer, they actually put the logo for 7-Up Spot. And this is really a puzzle game, unlike Cool Spot for like the Sega Genesis, which I do also have, which is a platformer game. This is a lot kind of like, I guess, Chinese checkers. That's the best way I can kind of describe it. I am terrible at that, or at least I'm not any good and not real good at it. So the game itself, I guess I kind of wondered why, you know, that's what you'd create for trying to promote this 7-Up and, the whole spot kind of logo promotion, I guess. But either way, I guess that's what they had for it. I do remember hearing about this game as a kid, and of course, let's face it, we watched a lot of television back then. There wasn't really the internet per se. At least most people didn't have it. So you're influenced a lot by commercials, and so this was a commercial logo, and people maybe were foolish enough to buy it. And I don't know. I had a chance to purchase it. I think I bought this one on the internet, and it's a pretty decent quality copy. But the game itself is really nothing to write home about. Okay, this game is definitely something to write home about. This is River City Ransom, which is a Technos game, and I remember reading the walkthrough for this one in Nintendo Power, and that was a pretty cool concept. More or less, you are kind of like a high school kid, and there's these various little street gang factions, and it's a beat 'em up. And the Technos characters were used. I never played this game, but I'm pretty sure someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But I'm pretty sure Technos was the same company that made Super Dodgeball, and they also made, I know for sure, Nintendo World Cup, which was on my. Oh, I haven't shown that game yet. But anyways, Nintendo World Cup as well. And it has kind of that same style to them. And River City Ransom's a fun game. You go to stores, you can pump yourself up, you can help improve your stamina and whatnot. And I don't know, I've played it a bunch of times. It's really fun. It can get hectic and difficult at times, but the thing I like about it is just like there's a lot of depth to it. For normally a beat 'em up genre, there isn't depth. It's all about literally just beating people up. And this one, there's a little more nuance to it. It has, with the ability to purchase different items, whether food or books, to help improve your character. It kind of adds, to me, a little greater level of interest to it, and there's more of a story. And so River City Ransom to me is a really cool game. Solstice. Okay, this is by ImageSoft. I think the game, the logo is probably more interesting than the game itself. If I remember correctly, Solstice is a game where you have like a limited lifespan, and you pretty much constantly have to be worrying about your lifespan because it's kind of constantly ticking away. And that makes it really frustrating to get anything accomplished because it's all about just trying to stay alive. And it's difficult to find time to do the tasks that you need to do to move along in the game. And so, needless to say, it's kind of annoying to say the least. So it's a game that I think had good intentions. It was meant to give you a challenge, but there was so much maintenance. Like I said, just in terms of staying alive, it kind of killed the fun factor of the game. So that's Solstice. Picked that up a couple years ago. It's not a particularly valuable game, but I do remember reading about it in Nintendo Power back in the day. Okay, I kind of mentioned this, and this is so I told you guys yesterday that I have the NES Satellite, which was the 4-player adapter that used kind of an infrared, I think, beam, so that it was cordless that you could set up. And I got that with a Nintendo, so it was like the 4-player pack. And it came with the pack-in game was what you see here. It was Super Spike Volleyball and Nintendo World Cup. And I played the living hell out of both of these games. I love them both. Super Spike Volleyball, I told you yesterday with Kings of the Beach that I like beach volleyball, but Super Spike Volleyball I thought was more interesting. Definitely the graphics were a step up, and the pace of the game was a lot faster. and it's still one of my favorite sports games to play for the Nintendo, to be perfectly honest. And that it's even more fun when you're playing it, cooperatively with friends, either, just as a team, a 2-person team, or, of course, playing your friends 2-on-2. Nintendo World Cup's kind of the same way, although this is definitely one that, as action gets busy, it certainly can get glitchy and kind of where it kind of flickers in and out. But I was a soccer player growing up, and so I was always looking for any opportunity to play a soccer-like game, and this really was, I thought, was the best quality soccer game for the Nintendo. And the thing that, of course, makes Nintendo World Cup unique, apart from the fact that it uses the same kind of characters as like River City Ransom, which I just talked about, was the fact that each team, and they're all national teams, as one would expect for the World Cup, they had these different super shots, and the super shots were almost like unstoppable, almost, and they were kind of unique to each country. So I remember Russia had what I used to call a blister ball, where after you could trigger the super shot in 2 ways. You could do a bicycle kick that would trigger a super shot, or you could trigger it based on your steps. So as you're dribbling the ball, you take so many steps, and if you timed it just right, you could trigger a super shot. And that was always pretty tricky because you had to count pretty fast, and it varied by different teams. So some teams, it only took you 5 steps to trigger your super shot. Other teams, it took 7 or 6 or whatever. And I remember Russia's super shot. It was like I said, I called it the blister ball, because the ball would like pulsate into what looked like kind of like a rubber like dodgeball, and then after a few seconds, then it would just streak like a laser towards the goal. And in fact, it would go so fast the screen couldn't keep up with it. And then you hear like the goal horn sound if it made the back of the goal, or you hear the whistle that it went out of bounds. You're pissed if it went out of bounds, of course. But probably the best shot in the game was either if you were Mexico or Argentina. They had kind of a looping kick where you kick it and the ball would do kind of a loop in front and then back down behind you and then back out front at real high speeds. And it was pretty much a money goal every single time. And in some ways it was kind of cheap that Mexico and Argentina had that almost unstoppable goal, or that super kick, because those two teams were two of the faster teams in the game. And speed is definitely an advantage to have with your players. And so to have a kick that was unstoppable plus having a fast team kind of made those two teams pretty overpowered. But of course, playing against them, it made that much bigger of a challenge. But if you wanted just to crush your friend, you'd just be Argentina, and you were pretty much unstoppable in that game. But a lot of fun. I love the creativity. You can mess with the roster because, especially if you're a Team USA, each individual player on Team USA had their own super shot. So some had like kind of a hover laser ball. Another one, the weirdest one, was one where the ball would just kind of bounce, and the ball had some kind of inertia where it could literally knock through a player and knock them witless. One of the things in Nintendo World Cup, and maybe kind of similar to like River City Ransom, was that as you were doing slide tackling and things like that in the game, your player could only take so many hits before effectively then they just kind of lay motionless on the field. I used to always say they were dead. And if you wanted to be cheap in the game, you could just basically beat up the other team's players, and then effectively it was like a field of dead people to, you didn't have any opposition, which of course made the game much easier. But that was one of the parts of the game that made it a little bit different. You could also play on different surfaces. You could play on concrete, you could play on ice. Ice was kind of fun because when they were dead bodies, sometimes the bodies would just kind of slowly skid around the play field, which was kind of weird. But I don't know, one of my favorite games. And unfortunately, this is not my original copy. I borrowed it to a friend. The only time I ever borrowed a game to a friend, and the jackass stole it from me. He never gave it back to me, and that really pissed me off. So luckily, though, it was a pack-in game, so it's pretty easy to get a hold of, and I picked one up again. Okay, the eternal debate, ice hockey by Nintendo. This game is awesome in its own way and very distinctive. It's 4-on-4 hockey, and as some of you guys may know, I'm a huge hockey fan, and you really just had two options for hockey, realistically. I know there was another hockey game out there that's pretty rare, but I never saw it. But you had this one, and of course, Blades of Steel, which I'll talk about in a bit. But ice hockey was the first one I ever played on the Nintendo, and this was a game that my friend Andrew had. And then later I picked one up myself. And the game is kind of, I guess, meant to be Olympic competition, so your national teams. The national teams really are nothing special. Same way kind of with Blades of Steel. The only thing that changes is really, I guess, the color of your jersey. But beyond that, there's nothing distinctive about any of the nations in the game. I think you could be Czechoslovakia, Poland, Canada, United States, the Soviet Union, and I think that was it. I'm pretty sure. Or in Sweden. Yeah, in Sweden. And you had a choice between three different types of player. You had, of course, your small little guys, which were very fast but had very weak shots. Your tall, as we used to call them, skinny guys. Tall, skinny guys, which were kind of medium speed, medium shot power. And then, of course, you had what everyone called your fatties. And the fat guys that were slow as hell, but they had a hard shot. And, of course, they were big and powerful, at least in terms of the physical battles. And, of course, everyone loved getting into a scrape in the game where you'd have your little fight and then, one person gets sent to the penalty box or whatever, and that was always kind of hilarious. But the game is a lot of fun, and whether it's controlling the shot, one thing I'll say in the game is you tend to hit the posts a lot in this game. I don't know what it is. The post must have like a hit box or something, because it seems like there's a lot of times where you look like you have an open chance and you ring it off the post, and you spend a lot of times kind of chasing after the puck. And one of the things I guess I didn't know about it, which I don't know, you call me aloof or whatever, was I didn't realize that when you play the game, you go through regulation just like you would in a real hockey game. So you have 3 periods, and then of course you have overtime. Well, after overtime, you have a shootout, which is actually still the way it is in international hockey competition. But the thing that I found interesting is then after you played the shootout, if there still was no decision, in other words, the game was still tied, then the game would go to no goalie mode overtime. And I remember my tennis players, I'm a boys tennis coach, and one of the things we do because of all the rainy weather we have in the spring is I do a video game tournament, and we play Super Nintendo and Nintendo games, and they're all sports games. And I do it to kind of boost camaraderie. They get split up into teams. And I had some kids playing ice hockey, and I'd never seen a game go past really the shootout before. And sure enough, it did. And of course, when it was discovered there was no goalies, it was absolute pandemonium. But the funny thing is like even though the nets were empty, the 2 kids that were playing couldn't put a shot on goal to save their life. It was hysterical. And the kids are just loving it. And eventually, of course, there was a victor. But I just thought that was hysterical, and it's definitely a game where, you know, if anybody that's played it, you always ask them, okay, what's your lineup? You know, shorties, skinnies, fatties. What would it be? For myself, for those of you that are curious, I would have one fatty, two skinny guys, and a little guy. That's me. That's, to me, the most balanced lineup. But again, I'm just speaking for myself. I know some people just like the skinny guys and they don't even bother with the little ones, or they go with two fatties and two skinnies. But there's no right or wrong answer. If you want, you can let me know what your choice would be at Crease and Assist on Twitter, and just let me know in the comments section too if you want to. But this is a classic game. There's also a pretty cool song out there called Four Fat Guys, which is all about, of course, the four fat guys that you could put a lineup with, which would have been pretty bold, but you probably weren't going to be doing too good. Legacy of the Wizard. This is another Broderbund title. I think this is kind of an action. No, it's not an action platformer, I don't think. Well, yeah, it's kind of an action platformer, kind of similar to Battle of Olympus. I remember seeing this game in the scoring charts that used to be on Nintendo Power all the time, that people leave their scores. And it was a game I never really saw anywhere, but I kept reading about it. And I saw this game at my local game store here, Games for Us in Boston, and I picked it up. I still haven't played it yet, so I don't know. What do you guys think of this title? Just let me know. But I don't know. This is a pretty good copy, but this was a game I heard about, at least seeing the scores and being curious, but it was never a game that really crossed my path. This is a kind of interesting game. This is Maniac Mansion by Jackal, and also a Lucas Arts game. I know that they had a computer game so this was the Nintendo, I guess, NES port of it. And it's really about a group of teenagers that go to this really freaky place, and they have to do these different kind of tasks. It's kind of a point-and-click adventure. And I remember reading about this in Nintendo Power, and I just thought it was kind of cool, just because it has kind of a different style and storyline to it than a lot of the typical adventures that you see in Nintendo, where it's, clearly fantasy or clearly science fiction. This one's just kind of a little more offbeat, and I thought that was kind of neat about it. And I don't know, it was a game I always wanted to pick up, and one I also hope that I can play with my wife, because I don't think it's quite as based on finesse as other video games are, and I kind of already talked to you about that. Like, we're going to play Deja Vu together. But so this is a Maniac Mansion. I have not played it yet, but I've heard nothing but good things. Okay, so these last games, they're going to be kind of familiar to you. Akari Warriors, the classic SNK game. This game is frustrating. There's lots of it that, I think they could have just made a couple of details and it would have made it a little more sane. You have to have infinite lives to really be competitive whatsoever. And then, of course, is the ABBA code. But the game itself is still frustratingly difficult. I mean, you can just sit there and grind through it, but you just die and die and die, and it's very unforgiving. And I don't know. It's a game that I think could have been done better than it was. It's, of course, a kind of a classic arcade port, and it's one of those games that, it seemed like a lot of people had it, and I don't know. So I never really played it too much as a kid. I only played it really after I started collecting games again, and I quickly learned what everyone else did, that it's a bit of a grind, to say the least. So me being trying to be a completionist, I purchased the sequel, albeit I have not played this. This is Akari Warriors 2 Victory Road. And by what I've heard is it's pretty much the same as the first one. There's not a lot of difference to it. You don't see this one quite as much, but it's really not that rare of a game, just like Akari Warriors. So there's that one. But the one that you don't see as much, and my copies certainly had kind of a rough life, this is Ikari Warriors 3, The Rescue. And this was a later release for Nintendo. And even then, it wasn't, at least by what I remember, it's not that much different than the first one. So you'd think they would have changed things a little bit more, even though the cover certainly looks much improved from the first one. The game itself is just okay. So that's Ikari Warriors, the whole trio there. Okay, now into our last group of games, and you'll be able to tell the theme pretty quick. Okay, this is Bill Elliott's NASCAR Racing, or NASCAR Challenge. I remember playing this game at my friend Brad's house. I was kind of a NASCAR fan as a kid. I grew up cheering for guys like Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison, or not Bobby Allison. Yeah, maybe Bobby Allison. I probably just messed that up. Some NASCAR fans screaming at the TV, or at the TV, what the hell am I talking about? The computer right now, or their phone. But I remember watching NASCAR races. I enjoyed stuff like that as a kid. And I certainly remember Bill Elliott, him, Rusty Wallace, and some of those greats, of course, Richard Petty. The game itself is pretty simple. I mean, you're a NASCAR racer. This one's where you're driving. It's like from behind the steering wheel, which I thought was pretty cool. And you can do some modifications to your car, which of course that totally makes sense given what it was about. But I remember thinking that was pretty cool for a Nintendo game. And funny thing is, I didn't know too many other people that had this game, and this is certainly before I think personally NASCAR kind of really took off in the late 90s, early 2000s. So this was kind of a cool one when NASCAR still was kind of a maybe not the sweetheart that it became, and then of course that bubble burst pretty fast. But I don't know. It was a game I definitely remember playing at Brad's house, and I never, for whatever reason, I never picked it up myself. I don't know why, but I wasn't a huge racing game fan, so the fact I enjoyed it was kind of a feat in itself. You know, if it got me to like it, then it couldn't have been too bad. Okay, this game I definitely remember. Of course, this is Double Dribble by Konami, and you can see mine has a little drill hole in it. Yeah, that's cute. But anyways, I'm not sure why that. Maybe this was a rental, I think. But anyways, this is Double Dribble by Konami, the ubiquitous basketball game from for Nintendo. Probably the one that probably just about everybody played. And again, kind of like what I mentioned with the hockey, like ice hockey, you had different teams to select, but literally they were no different other than just the color of their uniform. And then the dopey mascot, which would walk out at halftime, which was always kind of a treat. And of course, Konami didn't want to pay for licensing from the NBA, so the different, I guess you'd say, mascots kind of related to the NBA teams, sort of, but not really. I remember Los Angeles being a wave, if I remember correctly, and they were blue instead of gold like the Lakers. Maybe that was their homage to the Clippers. I don't know, but either way, there of course is a money shot in this game where you can make a three-pointer every single time, which of course was shown to dramatic fashion in Family Guy. And that is pretty hilarious because at some point that was what someone would know. They'd figure out that honey spot on the court, and if someone didn't know about it, it of course became almost comical at how how frustrating it was for that other player, and that was always kind of a funny thing. But of course, once everyone figured that out, maybe it just usually probably became a foul fest, and you ended up shooting lots of terrible free throws, which in that game was kind of tough. But it was definitely a game that was one you was so much better, so much more enjoyed when you played with friends than it was playing against the computer. So really, I guess you'd say the hockey equivalent of Double Dribble was Blades of Steel, and to this day, Blades of Steel is revered by hockey aficionados. Pretty much you have, if you want to make a choice with somebody. While ice hockey was a fun game, for the real hardcore fans, it's always, okay, is it NHL 94 or Blades of Steel? And there's two camps, and those people are very militant about it, and they'll tell you why they like NHL 94 better than Blades of Steel, or why they like Blades of Steel more than NHL 94. Blades of Steel, one of the usually common disqualifiers of NHL 94 for those that are the Blades of Steel compatriots, is the fact that, of course, in Blades of Steel, you can fight, and in NHL 94, you cannot. That was part of their agreement to get the league's blessing and their licensure back from the situation that they had in 1993 when the league didn't license it, but the NHL Players Association did. But anyways, that's a whole different story for itself. But Blades of Steel had fighting in it, and of course, it is 1980s style where it's all about throwing punches. And the fun thing, of course, was that whoever lost the fight is the one that ended up in the penalty box. And the game itself was meant to be intense. It moves faster in some ways than like ice hockey. It looks a little more realistic. And I don't know. I used to always be Minnesota. Unfortunately, they were not colored like the North Stars. I'm sure they were. Konami, just like they did with Double Dribble, didn't want to get in any kind of they didn't want to have to spend money and license with the National Hockey League, so they made the colors purple and gold, which of course were the Vikings colors, and that was okay, but it didn't feel right for whatever reason. It just didn't. But I had a lot of fun with it. This was a game that I think Andrew had also, and so this was definitely one you wanted to, again, play with your friends. It was so much more fun than playing against the computer. And it's still a classic. It's one that, you just say Blades of Steel around your friends, and, whether they were big video gamers or not, they usually would smile because it's a game that was close to their heart. And it's no different for myself. Pretty cheap, too. It's if you're looking for a cheap way to get back to your childhood, Blades of Steel is usually under $10. So, Track and Field 2. This another Konami title. I never really played the original Track and Field. Maybe I rented that one once. I know I rented this game a couple times, and then I eventually picked it up. And this is one of my brother's favorite games. My brother, being who he always wanted to stand out and do something different, and so my brother purchased a NES Advantage controller, which we still have, and the NES Advantage is quite handy to have for track and field, especially for the hammer throw. Using the hammer throw or trying to do the hammer throw with the normal D-pad kind of sucks. You don't get a lot of rotation, you don't get a really great throw, but with the joystick, the arcade stick on the NES Advantage, you can just launch that thing, and that was so much more fun, and of course you get a much higher score. And you could do a series of different Olympic style events: diving, karate, fencing was one that I always remember, triple jump, archery, but then they also threw in these side games which were really kind of interesting, including the arm wrestling game. And the arm wrestling game certainly was, oh man, I can't think of the name of the film, but it was definitely a total ripoff of the Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling movie, where he's like wrestling like truckers and whatnot. And you're either the guy who looks kind of like Sylvester Stallone, or you're this kind of trucker person. And there's all these like faces that are made as you try to, press the buttons faster, as fast as you can to, of course, overpower the computer opponent. And I always thought that was really interesting that they just threw that into track and field too. It seemed really random and strange, and yet at the same time, it was always kind of a fun one. Even though the game usually left you pretty exhausted, to win an arm wrestling match, you really had to feverishly push at those buttons, or if you were cheap, I guess you just have a turbo controller. Like, hey, the advantage, I'll turn the turbo on. Oh, I'm gonna win this one. But otherwise, keeping it fair. Usually, we're pretty tired out after a match of arm wrestling. But definitely a game we enjoyed and had a lot of fun with. Where in time is Carmen Sandiego? I remember when my mom picked this game up, it came with a companion it was called a desk encyclopedia. So it looked about the size of like your average looked about the size of your average dictionary. And that was meant to kind of help you as you traveled through different time periods in search, of course, the world criminal, Carmen Sandiego, and her gang of thieves. And for myself, who was kind of, like I said, a nerd and into history, it was kind of a edutainment game, as Chris profiled in a video he had. I'll put that in the links below. The thing I remember about overall, it's pretty deductive reasoning. Even if you had a real basic understanding of history, you probably could figure out a lot of the facts. But if you didn't, that's what the little desk encyclopedia was for. And that in itself was a nice little reference thing to have as a kid. Again, remember, this is a day and age before the internet. And so we were still using books. Go figure. And but anyways, one of the things I remember in the game was the names of the fellow criminals for Carmen Sandiego, like Gene Yuss, and they were kind of like the names that Bart Simpson used to give out to Mo, like huge ass or something like that, except for they were not naughty, and they weren't quite as funny, but they were kind of names that, of course, they were kind of puns, I guess. And I remember I incorporated some of those. I wrote a story in 7th grade, and I kind of more or less copied some of those dumb names from the game. And my teacher thought it was very clever, but I pretty much just ripped off the idea from Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, and I felt very clever. Okay, so don't tell on me. So you can go back and tell Mr. Schroeder Davis that I ripped off that idea, but I was just inspired. I was inspired by creative material. But anyway, so it was a fun one. I wouldn't necessarily say the game had a ton of replay value once you caught Carmen Sandiego. Really it really was no different than catching any of the other criminals. It just took time, but I don't know. It was a game that I enjoyed for the time I had it. Okay. Now, this is one of my favorite games. This is The Adventures of Bayou Billy. Maybe on another stream, I'll show you that I have the soundtrack to The Adventures of Bayou Billy. Yes, like a lot of Konami games, one of the cool things was that they usually had a music section. So you could listen to the music through the game if you wanted to, or sit there and click off the different sound effects. And I remember I used to do that too. I would turn on one of the songs and then, sit there and rip away with like the machine gun and stuff. And I used to think that was so neat. And that kind of gave for like hours of just unstructured entertainment. But the game itself is pretty hard. It's kind of a beat 'em up platformer with some other elements. There's a driving part, and there's also a part that utilized the light gun. And that's what I thought was really cool, is that the game was more than just walking around punching people in the face or stabbing them with a knife or the ugly stick. That was my favorite weapon in the game, was the ugly stick. But this game was also brutally hard. And the farthest I ever got in this game was to Bourbon Street, which is about 2/3 into the game. And it wasn't easy getting there because you had to go through at least 2 driving stages and a light gun stage on top of the normal 2 levels you had to go through. And by that time, you had burned up your continues, so then you were done. You only had, I think, 2 continues, and then that was it. Pretty typical for a Konami title. But I like the storyline. I know the Japanese Famicom version, I think it's called Mad City, if I remember correctly. That is a lot easier. It's one-hit kills when you punch a crocodile, or sorry, not crocodile, it'd be an alligator in the United States. If you punch an alligator. Also, I believe the diver guys aren't sitting there equipped with a bulletproof vest, which was annoying as crap when you go against them. I really would like to get the Famicom version of the game, just because I think I would enjoy it, just because it's just a tad bit easier. Although the other thing I would need to get to is, of course, a modified light gun so I could use it on a normal HD television. I don't have a CRT TV to do that anymore, but that was definitely one of my favorite games. And I don't know, I picked it up, and it's a pretty available game out there. The artwork's cool. It's done by that same guy who did the Metal Gear Solid one, Mr. Du Bois. I had him on my link on my last video. Okay, Top Gun. This is a game I think just about everybody had. I know that my friend Andrew had it, and I played it there a lot. And it's a flying game, just like what you'd expect, like from the film. You're flying an F14 Tomcat, and you're seeing it from a cockpit view. And the gameplay is pretty simple, but of course, it all comes down to the fact that you have to land the damn plane, and that sucks. I don't know, that I was terrible at landing the plane, and it was always depressing to watch my plane, hurtle out of the sky and like either miss the carrier altogether or land up short. I would have been ejecting and wasting a lot of taxpayer money because I couldn't land the F14 to save my life. And I give the game credit. Landing on an aircraft carrier is difficult. It's probably one of the most challenging things a naval pilot does, and they definitely made it a challenge in that game. Not a lot of depth though. The bosses are pretty kind of repetitive, I thought. But I did have the second version of this game, but I got rid of it because I hated it. And that game was kind of done. That was the second mission. I think that was what it was called. But yeah, it was fun little entertainment, I guess. Okay, this is Jackal. It's kind of a cool game. You drive around in kind of a Jeep, and basically you're freeing different hostages and whatnot. A lot of Konami titles seem to have kind of that. They definitely were believers in action films and whatnot, I think. And that was who they appealed to with their game selection. And I think that's a big reason why so many kids love playing Konami games, because it kind of appealed to your inner 10-year-old child, really, which was all about action and blowing stuff up. And this was a fun one for sure. Okay. First one is Super Contra, or Super C as it's known. This is, of course, the sequel to the classic run-and-gun Contra game for Konami. This is actually the game I had first for a long time. It's okay. I mean, it's really pretty much the same as the first one, just about. even though the first one is just, that's just steeped in the lore of what it meant to so many people. But I enjoyed this one a lot. You're two soldiers gunning it out, seemingly out in the rainforest. Definitely probably inspired a lot by the movie Predator. And a lot of the enemies looked very Predator or the movie Aliens inspired kind of enemies in the game. And of course, if I had Super C, I had to get Contra, the original. And this game still holds up. I don't care. As soon as you hear the opening theme, and then of course the infamous Konami code, this is really what it's all about. I have a Contra marquee on my wall. When I kind of show more of my game room a little bit more in another stream, I'll show you that. I remember playing this in the arcades on the like the Nintendo. They had like a system where it had like 25 Nintendo games on an arcade cabinet. I remember playing it there. Played this at my cousin's house. Rented this all the time. I'm sure this was a game that this was usually one of the games you'd look for at the rental places first, and it almost always seemed to be out, which it makes sense. It was so fun, and everyone wanted it. It was fun to play by yourself, but even more fun to play co-op. That's really where it was at. Contra, absolute classic. Okay, so our next, I do not have Contra Force. I would like to get it, but that's pretty rare. Oops, sorry, pretty expensive. Sorry about that. You couldn't see that. Castlevania. Speaking of another Konami absolute classic. Really, to me, one of the gold standards of action platformers for the Nintendo. Game still holds up pretty well, although the graphics at times are a bit ugly, but the game's still a lot of fun, and I think that it really started off a series of games that are some of the most beloved, really, in all of video gaming. Right now, I'm playing, I guess, a game that was not just inspired, but also created by those that were part of the making of the whole Castlevania series, and Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night right now, and I love it. And again, it wouldn't have happened if Castlevania had never taken off. So this game has a long legacy, and it just keeps getting better and better. And going through the whole storyline, whether it's a prequel or the lifetimes of later members of the Belmont family, it just seems to get better and better. And that's why the series endures, I think, so well. And plus, whether it's the music, whether it's the level design, it just, I don't know, it just hits everything just right. But that was not my first Castlevania game. My first Castlevania game was Simon's Quest. And this is actually my original copy I had from when I was a kid. This was maybe my third Nintendo game I had. And Friday Night Arcade made this comment, and I will totally agree with him. The cover art on this I thought was fantastic. You see the first one, and if you compare it, this one's okay, but this one looks just so much sharper, and that got me to buy the game. And it's very different from this one. Has more of a almost RPG like element to it, and I know for a long time people really ripped Simon's Quest, and I think what's happened, and it's kind of interesting to see how it's evolved. People went from kind of teasing people over Simon's Quest to now having a greater appreciation just for what it was. And while it's not perfect, they appreciate some of the innovative ideas that it had in it. And not only that, the soundtrack is unbelievable. Some of the best songs of the whole series are in Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. And, anyone can understand the feeling of dread, especially if you were caught in the woods when suddenly it tells you, oh, it's a terrible night for a curse, because you might realize at that point you better get back to a town of some kind quick, because you're going to be dead. And I don't know. I just really like the game. It's definitely parts of it were not necessarily the most obvious, and that's definitely part of the flaws of the game. I would not have gotten through this game if I had not picked up kind of a, I guess you want to call it a walkthrough book. Back when I was a kid, I bought it at the local grocery store, and it had Simon's Quest in it, and I learned, of course, the kneeling at the wall or the cliff to summon a tornado. I don't know how anyone would have figured that out, really, unless you had some kind of guide. So that definitely was kind of what broke the game open for me. But then I beat it, and of course that always feels gratifying. And I don't know, I enjoyed this game a lot, and it's even kind of fun to replay it, even though kind of once you know what to do, it's the challenge isn't quite there, but I still find it's a fun game. Of course, the best one of the series, in my opinion, well, Castlevania, the original one's pretty good, and Simon's Quest was pretty decent. Dracula's Curse is just, another step ahead. And that's maybe kind of what made Castlevania so special, is that it was a game that seemed to make sequels and seemed to hit all the right notes each time. And Dracula's Curse, of course, added the ability to have more characters, which certainly kind of opened up the elements to, like, whether it was your preferences or being able to have access to levels and parts of the game that you wouldn't otherwise. And it had a little bit of the ability to choose where the direction of your journey. And that too is kind of a powerful thing for the player to have. So you felt like you had a little more control in it. And this game holds up very well, even today, I think, personally. Still one of the best action platformers for the entire console, in my opinion. Dracula's Curse is freaking awesome. If you can get a hold of it, if you don't have a copy already, get a hold of it. It's the best. Okay, I'll start off with this one. This is Gradius. This was a space shooter. I played this game a ton. I rented it a lot. I remember when I first played it at my cousin Casey's house, and this was definitely one of our favorite games. Yes, challenging, at times frustrating, but so much fun. Unfortunately, the game in some ways suffers in certain parts where you get a lot of kind of slowdown or glitchiness, because as the game gets more busy, which is pretty common in a shooter. But the game itself is just amazing. I love the levels. I love the music. And this, of course, would also, kind of like Castlevania, would go on to be one of the great series in video games. And, maybe it needs to be maybe updated again and brought out again. It's still fun to go back and play these games. The appeal is still there. And I really enjoyed playing Gradius. I have the soundtrack to it as well. I can show you that record that I have, which is pretty cool. And had tons of fun with this one. And of course, the Konami code works in this game as well. Okay, but I do not have much experience with its sequel. And I know that for some, they like this game better. And this is Life Force. And the only thing I would kind of say about Life Force, which I think is a disservice, is that, and maybe you can say I had my head in the sand, but I didn't know this was a Gradius game. I had no idea. I didn't know that this was effectively Gradius 2. And to me, the big failure is, I guess without looking at it very, very closely, I don't know how they would have expected anyone to have known that, just given like the cover art. And I think if I would have known that, I probably would have given it a chance. But I guess I kind of looked at it, thought it was something different. And so, I didn't pick it up. I always saw it in places, but I never heard anyone talking to me about it. And so I guess I just assumed it was a completely different game, and that it had nothing to do with Gradius. And had I known, I would have definitely probably played it. It comes at you with a little bit different perspective. It's kind of like Journey, or what is the movie where you journey inside your body. That's kind of what it looks like. You're finding like biological kind of organisms in it. And it's very interesting. Chris had classic game he throws out as one of his favorite games, and it looks really challenging. And of course, it follows. You know, it's you're in the Vic Viper spaceship, and I don't know. It looks good. I just haven't gotten around to playing it yet. I know I'll probably get kicked out of the Discord for that, but it's. I'm just being honest. But I wish they would have put Gradius 2 on it. Just to, I would have picked it up. I feel like I missed an opportunity. But hey, that's what the games are there for. I can go and play it anytime. So I need to get around to that. Okay, the Goonies. Okay, great movie, strange video game, but interesting video game. There's some first-person sort of like level crawling that is kind of unique, but it also doesn't necessarily relate all that directly to the movie. And your little character looks really stupid. He doesn't look anything like the main hero in the film, and the Goonies 2 also kind of probably threw me for a loop. It was like, the Goonies 2, well, what's the first one? There wasn't a first one. I don't know why they did that. The film is one of my favorites as a kid. I still love watching it. I really hope they never make a remake of it. Leave it alone, please. It's great as it is. It's a classic. But this is a weird kind of oddball game. Maybe kind of like the film is odd, but it doesn't follow it all that closely. You see the fertilities in it a little bit, but I don't know. It's a bit of a head scratcher to me. And I used to see this game a lot around, but no one ever was telling me they were playing it, so I didn't have a lot of interest in it, even though I enjoyed the film. This is one I think I'm going to try playing with my wife, even though I know it's more of a platformer, and I know it can be frustrating. I think she just might enjoy the storyline, and maybe we can enjoy that together. Okay, second to last game here, and this is Image Fight by IRM, and this is another space shooter. IRM is a company that is more famous for another game, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this game is pretty neat, and I think it's very underrated as a title for the Nintendo. It's a space shooter where you have like these little turrets, and they shoot in different directions, and it really adds for a very different experience than like what you have if you're playing like Gradius and you're familiar with like the options and whatnot. That's cool, but this one, there's a little more variability to it, and I think that's really kind of cool. And I've played it. It's very unique, and I picked this one up locally here at Games for Us in Moss, and it was part of a huge collection of things in a pretty scary kind of Rubbermaid tote that had a lot of crusty stuff in there. Fortunately, this was not one of the crusty ones, and I saved it. But this one was pretty cool, and I'm really glad I picked it up. IRM, a publisher where I wish they would have made more games than they did. Man, that's some good stuff. So this is, I guess you'd say, my piece de la resistance. That's my best French I can do. And this is a reboot of it's Metalstorm Collector's Edition. And this is by Retrobit. And this is absolutely awesome. And also terribly, terribly frustrating. And I'll show you why. So as I start to break this apart, or show you kind of what it looks like unboxed. So here you can see it. Pretty cool. And I know that, so you can see the M308, which is the mech that you operate in Metalstorm, which is one of the coolest Nintendo games, I think, ever. And yet you're going to see the conundrum that I have in just a minute. So you take the box out, and what you would have found, which I took out of the box, and it sits in its own box, so I haven't messed with it. This is the M308 mech that it comes with. So you can see my hand, it's a little bit smaller than my hand, so that gives you maybe a rough idea of the size. So I kept it in the box again. Yeah, I realized that might seem, a lot of people might want to display it, but I don't know. I just, about values and stuff, and I don't know. I can still see it. It still displays nice. So I left it in there. And then on the inside, you have, this is where the box where that little figure would be, and then you have a pin. So you have this enamel pin of Metalstorm, which is pretty cool. Again, the M308 mech right there. And again, I didn't take it out. Yeah, I know it seems kind of dumb, but and then you get a certificate, or you get some artwork. So again, you get the M308 mech here, and then here's another one. That's just pretty cool. And then you also get your certificate of authenticity. So they only made 3,000 of these collector's edition boxes with the figurines and all the rest of it. So that's pretty cool. I don't know, but so it comes with that. And then, of course, the thing that's really important and the most important thing in the entire box is a complete in-box copy, sealed copy of the game itself. And this is a remake. This is where my conundrum is. I have the game, and I know, of course, it's going to be a lot more valuable if it stays sealed in its box. Yet at the same time, I really want to play Metalstorm. And Metalstorm is a game that's pretty rare. It's about a little over $200 to find it out in the wild, and it's not easy to get a hold of. And so if I really want to play this game, I'm leaning, at least towards myself, having to pick up a loose copy somewhere and leaving this as it is to keep its collectability value high. I know it's a remake, but it is a limited edition, so that's part of the reason where my conundrum is. If this was something that they just made millions of, again, I guess, I'd be like, oh, no big deal. But since it is a collector edition, it's harder for me to justify that in my mind, because I know as soon as I ripped it open, it would lose a lot of value right away. And whether it's the adult in me saying, don't do that, that's a foolish thing to do, I guess I feel like if I look at things that I purchase, like collections, while I enjoy them, I also see them in weird ways as an investment. And I want to be able to get a return on my investment if really things get tough for me, if I need to sell something. And so I want to make sure I have as much value as I can, and that's why I'm conflicted about it. But so far, as you can see, mine is sealed as it was when I first opened the box. Yeah, I even debated whether I was going to open the box, but I at least did that, I guess. And to me, the sealed game is separate all unto itself anyway, so I was really appreciative of that. So there it is, Metalstorm. See the box art in the back, sorry. It's just cool. So that's really about it for our stream. I'll put him back up here, M308. So that's about where I'm going to end my stream. Maybe tomorrow evening, maybe I'll stream again, and I'll start going through my Sega Genesis collection. That's my second largest collection of video games. So you have seen through my 4 videos all 171 NES games that I own, at least at this point. Do I intend on getting more? Probably. There definitely are some games that I want. Unfortunately, a lot of them are pretty darn expensive, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I already told you, in 2 years I've tripled my collection. So I'll probably get there someday, and it'll probably be in the next few years. But if I get more, I'll continue to do more videos like this. If you like it, please make sure you say you like it. Let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear it in the comments, either at the end of the film or the video here, or also, of course, on Twitter at Crease and Assist. So have a great rest of your afternoon. Tomorrow's going back to work for me, so that'll be fun. And we'll see you guys next time. See ya.